Hello, everyone, and welcome to Diversity Matters, where we explore all things diversity, equity, and inclusion related. I'm your host, Oscar Holmes IV, and I'm so excited to welcome our guest, the legendary James Earl Hardy, to the guest chair today, as we talk about Black LGBTQ narratives. And of course, we'll get to know James better throughout the episode, but just to give you some background on him, James Earl Hardy is the author of the groundbreaking B-Boy Blues series, including B-Boy Blues, which has been praised as the first gay hip-hop love story. A couple of James's books have been adapted for the stage, and he's won numerous stage and literary awards. He's an honors graduate of Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism and an entertainment feature writer and culture critic for a number of well-known outlets like Entertainment Weekly, Essence, The Advocate, and The Washington Post, to name a few. Mr. James Earl Hardy, welcome to Diversity Matters.
Thank you very much.
We'll be back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Hi, my name is Mackenzie Alston, and I'm the founder and CEO of ULC. U is personal, business, and career growth. We empower growth through knowledge, helping individuals and organizations become their best selves. We specialize in two areas of consulting. The first is in human resources, where we focus on strategies around talent, cultural management, and organizational effectiveness. And the second is in real estate sales, where we specialize in helping individuals find the right home for their needs in the Philadelphia area. With us, it's all about you.
So, as you know, I created Diversity Matters because I felt we needed an outlet that would tackle pressing issues and give voice to communities that might not receive the amplification that they deserve. So as a Black gay man myself, I knew how important it was to not only just talk about LGBTQ issues the first season, but also to center Black LGBTQ narratives in this first season. So as I thought about who I wanted to invite on to join me in this conversation, I immediately thought of you, as I've been a fan of your work for a long time. And I'm really honored that you took the time out of your busy schedule to join us for this inaugural season of Diversity Matters. So let's get started, James.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the invitation. And being 25 years in the game, it's nice to still be thought of.
Absolutely. You're legendary. So in the opening, I shared a little bit about your bio, but who would you say James Earl Hardy is? And are there ways that you would describe yourself that might not show up in a formal bio, but they're important to your sense of self?
Well, I think I'm pretty much an open book to most of the public, and that's probably because most people assume that the B-Boy Blues series is my story. So, which it isn't, actually. It definitely is an extension of me, but it doesn't tell the story of James Earl Hardy meeting a B-boy one summer and falling in love. So, but the simple answer is that I'm still a work in progress, and I'm enjoying the journey, getting to know me better and embracing all of me.
So in this episode, it's all about giving voice to Black LGBTQ narratives. So would you mind sharing your coming out, or some people like to say inviting in story?
I guess you could say my official coming out, because that certainly was what it was back then, was writing and having B-Boy Blues published. At that particular moment in my writing career, I was a journalist. I was at Newsweek in the arts department. And so I didn't write about gay people or gay issues, I think, for fear that it was out me. But then during that particular summer in 1993, I was assigned to read books that came in that the staff editors weren't familiar with, and if I came across anything interesting, to recommend them to them, to do a capsule review or maybe even a short profile on the author. And after reading maybe like a dozen books, I became depressed because I didn't see me anywhere.
Right.
And I think that was the epiphany. It was, maybe you don't see yourself in any of these books because you haven't written it. And so B-Boy Blues was born. So I kind officially came out, I think that my parents definitely knew. That's what they told me after B-Boy Blues came out.
Right.
And they always say, well, mothers know. They just know.
Absolutely.
And I was, for the most part, out to my other immediate family members and, of course, to my besties who were also gay, because I went to Pride, and I was even a member of organizations here in New York like Gay Men of African Descent. So it wasn't like I was living a closeted life, but I wasn't, for the most part, out professionally. And B-Boy Blues kicked that door down.
Right.
So that was the official knock on the so-called closet door for me.
So if we could go back to your early life, when do you think you knew that you were gay, and what was life for you growing up?
Well, I recall having those particular feelings very young, maybe like 5 or 6, and thinking, well, I don't feel the same way that other boys do about girls. And naturally, growing up in a somewhat religious Christian family, I knew that I should not speak on that.
Mm-hmm.
No one was specifically contemptible in their when they talked about or treating gay family members, because we certainly had gay family members. But it was almost kind of like a don't ask, don't tell kind of thing. Everybody knew, but nobody really spoke on it. So I, for the most part, kept that to myself. And so I didn't really see the type of, or experience the type of trauma that so many of us go through growing up. And I think that probably was because I kind of blended in the background. I would consider myself a shy guy, and so much not talkative. I let my writing do my speaking for me. So that's kind of like the way I express myself and kind of like socialized with other people. And for some reason, folks thought that was kind of cool. I mean, you're 8 years old and you're writing poems, and you're 15 years old and you're writing for a black newspaper. It's like, wow, nobody in my neighborhood had ever done something like that before. So I was kind of like a mini celebrity.
Right.
So it was easy for me to hide behind that. And, of course, nobody was asking those questions. So I just continued on that journey until, in my mid-20s, I finally, had to face the man in the mirror.
Right. Yeah, so similar to you, like I think I knew when I was probably 5 years old, and although like many people, I've tried to be the heterosexual throughout high school and things, and I came out when I was 21. I think I just probably turned 21. I came out to my family and friends, and professionally at that point. But luckily, like I didn't have horror stories really, like we hear a lot of people have, or even some sad stories, because we know there can be challenges that LGBTQ people face. But I'd like for you to share, your thoughts on what you feel like some of the best things about, being LGBTQ.
Well, I think that we are the fears because we occupy many spaces that are oftentimes marginalized, demonized, and just outright devalued and dismissed. We can oftentimes see the world very clearly and the people in it. And so I think that's our gift from God, that we were chosen to be black and sage and loving for those very reasons. Because as I oftentimes tell black heterosexuals, you can't have a revolution without us, because we are the revolution.
Right.
Just look at the history. We just have to continue to be vigilant and own it. That's all. Like Jimmy said, your crown has already been bought and paid for. All you have to do is put it on.
Right.
So just act like and know you are the royalty you are.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. So we know that it's a good thing for every community to have their narratives told, but why do you think it's so important for Black LGBTQ communities to have their narratives told?
We're still very much, in some regards, invisible. We're either the fly in the buttermilk, or we're the queer ground, not the black ground.
Right.
In some heterosexual person's reality, although it's usually a fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're very rarely centered where our voices and our histories and our loves are represented and celebrated. So, I mean, it's hard to believe that 25 years later, I'm still being asked who the gay rapper is.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And there are still folks who still have a very hard time wrapping their heads around the concept that homo and hip-hop are not mutually exclusive life stations. So we're still having those very elementary and, quite frankly, annoying conversations where people have very narrow definitions of what gay and straight and, yes, bi is, what black is, and who can own those labels. So, which is why it's so important for us to continue to push the envelope and tell as many stories about us as possible. Which is why I'm also so happy to see so many Black SGL men and women announcing their engagements and posting their wedding albums and literally celebrating their families, showing their kids going off to kindergarten for the first time, losing a tooth, and I mean, just ordinary things, but they're just so extraordinary because we never see it.
Right.
We got to see more of that.
Totally agree. So who and what inspired you to become a writer and to specifically write Black, gay, and bi narratives?
Well, writing for me has always been like breathing. I've always done it. I don't remember ever not doing it. I can't think what would happen if I couldn't. So it's always been a part of me. But it wasn't until I was in high school that I realized that, this is something that I actually could earn a living doing. So I pursued that. I went on the journalism track, St. John's University and Columbia U grad school, and, did my general assignment reporter, paid those dues at New York Daily News and New York Newsday, and freelance like crazy for Essence and The Source and Entertainment Weekly and so on and so on. So I was doing my thing and having a lot of fun doing it.
Right.
But it wasn't until B-Boy Blues that I really understood the power of the pen and what I was placed here to do. Because I never would have, I'd never written fiction before, and I never thought I would publish a book of any kind. So the fact that it happened and that it grew, because I thought after writing it, I wrote a book, it's cute, it's going to be published, it'll probably sell a few thousand copies, I'm going back to Newsweek. Well, Pookie and Little Bit had other ideas. So you just never know what the universe has in store for you.
Right. So just so our listeners know, there are 7 books in the B-Boy Blues series. But we will mainly discuss in this episode your latest book, Men of the House. It's interesting to hear that you didn't think you would write a book, and now you have all of these books.
Right.
I want you to tell us about your journey from 1994, when B-Boy Blues was first published, to your latest release, and how much growth you just experienced throughout this 25-year journey.
Well, when B-Boy Blues was published, I was still a full-time journalist. I didn't think I would be taking a detour of any kind. But once 1995 rolled around and I saw the response, I realized that this wasn't just something that this just wasn't a one-off thing. This wasn't a cute diversion, because it was certainly a lot of fun creating it, and I was enjoying people's reaction to it. Mm-hmm. But once you create something like that, it takes on a life of its own. And certainly, once you create characters like that, they may not be flesh and blood, but there's certainly spiritual beings orbiting your universe. So in all that activity, hitting the road that summer of 95, Raheem said, okay, Mitchell got to tell his side of the story, I want to tell mine.
Right.
And hence came second time around. So once that happened, it was clear that, no, this is not going to be just a one-time thing. I really need to see where this takes me, because I was also experiencing this type of communion that I didn't know existed from and with other Black SGL people. Because remember, this is the mid-90s. So If you go to Barnes & Noble and or Borders and they don't have the book, you ask them to order it, or your best friend who lives a couple of 100 miles or maybe even 1,000 miles away from you is telling you about this book and you can't find it, they send you their copy.
Right.
And they go out and buy another copy. So it was that kind of community,
Right,
that I was witnessing and that I was blessed to see. And that was blessing me. And that's when I also knew that then that, it's so much bigger than just Pookie and Little Bit. It really is about us.
right.
I mean, I left Newsweek and the freelance work started to fall off, and before you know it, I was writing books full time. And I guess you could say the quote mainstream end quote finally caught up with me with book 5 and 6, because the first 4 were published by Allison Books in Boston, a very small gay press.
Right.
In fact, I think the only people who were on staff at Allison was Sasha Allison himself and his copy editor, but he had freelance people doing graphic design and publicity. So, I mean, he was literally a one-man operation.
Right.
But then finally, HarperCollins came calling, and they published books 5 and 6, Love the One You're With, and A House Is Not a Home. And in fact, when A House Is Not a Home was released in 2005, I thought, okay, this has been a great journey. I've really enjoyed myself. I've met friends of the highest order. Pookie and Little Bit have afforded me the type of life that is very much blessed, but I think it's time to move on. Right. And I remember having this conversation with Elin Harris.
Right.
And he just laughed. He said, that's what you think. It's not over until they say it's over. And, of course, they being Pookie, Little Bit, and the crew. So a few years after that, Elin made his transition. And just a couple of months after that, I was approached about contributing to an anthology to salute him and his legacy, Visible Lives. And each one of us, myself, Ellie Bennett Clay, and Terrence Dean, contributed a very long short story to the collection in which Elin is a character. And I'm sure it tickles E in the spiritual realm to know that he was right, number one, and number two, that he's a character in the story meeting Mitchell, because Mitchell, being the burgeoning journalist himself, interviews Elin in the story. Right. And of course, Raheem comes up as a topic of conversation. So, and now, I think literally almost 8 years later, that anthology, Men in the House, which is actually you can't really say book 8 because at least 2 of those titles are novellas, and one is a long short story. So, at least the official 5th book in the series, but the 8th installment is Men of the House.
Right. So, I would just like to pause to just offer some respect for the late, great Elin Harris. His writing meant so much to me. I imagine it meant a lot to you as well. You know, his book, Invisible Life, was the first Black gay book that I read. And of course, B-Boy Blues, which came out in 94, was the second one that I read. And then his, Just As I Am, also came out in 94. So could you just, for our listeners, recount just some of your experiences with him and some of the thoughts you have about him just as a person and as a legend in our community?
Well, we met for the very first time in New York. This was the spring of 94 when Doubleday reissued Invisible Life and published the sequel, Just As I Am. It was appearing at a Different Light bookstore. And like everyone else, I waited online and got my book signed. And then I handed him a copy of The Galley for B-Boy Blues. And I told him that I have a novel coming out in December, and I know you're a very busy man. You're currently on tour, but I would love for you to read it, and if you enjoy it, maybe you can give me a jacket blurb. And he saw the title and the subtitle, and his eyes bugged. And he said, "Oh, definitely. I look forward to reading this. Thank you." And so I didn't expect to hear from the brother for, maybe a month or so, because he was literally on tour. But he called me 3 days later, and he said, "Oh, I could never write anything like this, but I'm so glad you did, because we need it. So he did give me the jacket blurb, and the novel came out in November, and then that following spring and summer, everywhere I went, because he was still promoting himself, folks would say, well, Ian was just here, and someone asked him, are there any other writers that folks should be reading? And he said, you. So he was such a gracious and charming gentleman. He knew that it was literally bigger than us, that what we were doing at that time was going to impact people in ways that we could never imagine.
Right.
And I actually saw that firsthand, just attending that particular book event of his, where there were mother-son, father-son, sibling couples there who thanked him for, opening their eyes and reuniting them and making them realize that why are you rejecting your same-gender loving family members?
Right.
It makes absolutely no sense. So, and then it started happening to me.
Right.
And so it was wonderful to witness just how much he was changing, not just the publishing industry, but in seismic proportion, how we as Black people talked about same-gender loving lives and finally allowing the space. Because really there wasn't nothing there before that gave us and I'm not saying it in so much that the Invisible Life trilogy and B-Boy Blues and then Second Time Around were kind of like educational tools, but those people who really needed to read books like that to understand that our lives were not that much different from yours really were educated by those books.
Absolutely.
So in that regard, it was, the blessings that have flowed from that are immeasurable.
Amen.
I'm still getting, it used to be, letters that were actually written on paper, sometimes in print, but usually cursive, placed in envelopes and sealed with stamps bearing Ella Fitzgerald.
Right.
People just saying the two simple words, thank you. And today it's the DMs and the Facebook messages I receive. So, different century, but the same impact is still taking place.
Absolutely.
For both myself and him too. So I really miss him, because I think that he would really be so pleased to see what the seeds we planted have grown. Terrell has an Oscar, Jericho has a Pulitzer, and Billy has a Tony and an Emmy.
Right.
And I think that, you really can trace all of that movement back to us, and even RuPaul. It's like laying the groundwork for somebody else to come and step through the door.
Definitely appreciate the trailblazers that all of you are. It really meant a lot to me growing up. I know it means a lot to so many other young Black boys growing up even today. So we're going to get back to your work just a little bit. And if anyone knows your work, they know that you love the word Jude. And I'm probably pronouncing it correctly. But so tell us,
So you mean
why? Yeah.
Okay.
What is the origin of Jude, and why do you keep it alive so much throughout your work?
Well, actually, the word has been is a creation of a very Jewish friend of mine, Andre Sidnor in St. Louis. He's been saying it forever.
Okay.
And when I was constructing Raheem as a character, I wanted him to have a language that was all his own. And so Jude just fit him perfectly. And naturally, it's now it's been passed down to the next generation, his son, Earl, a.k.a. Little Brother Man, and his best friends, Sydney and Ro.
So let's talk about Earl a little bit. So in Men of the House, why did you decide to write this book from Earl's perspective? And he's a heterosexual teenager.
I think it was about time that he was able to tell the story from his viewpoint, because he's been there from the beginning. The seesaw between Mitchell and Raheem in telling the story over the first 7 books, the one constant has been Little Brother Man. He's had a front row seat for all the ups and downs in their relationship. So And naturally, he knows that his father still loves and is in love with this man, who he calls Godfather, uncle. And so it made perfect sense to me that, well, not only would he tell the story this time, but he would make it so that they finally reunite. And so Raheem moves back into the home to share it with them and Mitchell's 5-year-old daughter, Destiny. And Little Brother Man himself is, I think that he is the evidence that same gender-loving people can raise heterosexual children.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because there's this notion that, well, if that gay people who raise children are going to so-called turn their children gay,
right.
which is just moronic. You don't turn gay, number one, and of course, sexual orientation is innate. It's not something you can alter. So he's heterosexual, and he's always been heterosexual, and he doesn't have a problem having same gender loving fathers. So why should the world have a problem with it?
So I'm gonna get a little deeper into Errol's story, and hopefully this doesn't rebuff you, but I will say, speaking of Errol's youth, it took me aback, and I thought it was a bit problematic narrative in the book, considering Errol's relationship with Max. She was 19 and he was only 14 when they started dating. So why did you decide to add, this underage relationship in the storyline, particularly in the area of Me Too? And we don't really see a lot of protection when it comes to boys, around things like sexual abuse and harassment. So did you go back and forth with your own self about including this storyline, or?
Well, I guess the simple answer to that is no, because those types of couples exist, and it's important for us to have the conversations about consent and when it's right and when it's not for a younger person to date an older person or have an intimate relationship with that person. But as Aunt Flo makes it perfectly clear, a 19-year-old can indeed date, let alone have sex with a 15-year-old. Mm-hmm. And Errol and Max, it's sex. They don't have sex until he's 15, and
she's 20.
Mac, one who approaches him, and not in a predatory manner. She thought he was 17 at least, but he's a mature young man for his age. It's okay, and it's actually legal for them to be a couple in New York State. I'm sure it probably isn't in some other municipalities, but there's a stark difference between, for example, in the third book in the series, If Only for One Night, where Mitchell has an affair, quote unquote, with his gymnastics coach. I mean, there's no question that on every single level, it's illegal and it's immoral. But Errol's relationship with Max, he's literally the first girl he's dated seriously. And even Mitchell, he's kind of like not too keen about that himself. But with Mitchell, it's not, that Max is so much 19 and you're 15. It's that you're 15 and I just don't think that you should be dating someone at this juncture, especially for the very first time, who's that much older.
Right.
Because Richard really can't speak on that because Raheem is 7 years younger than him.
But they're adults.
So I think he tempered that conversation correctly with him. I mean, and they're a great couple. They have a synergy that it's very clear that I don't know if Errol, because he's never been in love before, whether or not he's in love with her, whether or not he truly loves her, but he is very much attached and glued to her. So, and Max doesn't in any way, shape, or form come off as being someone who, Errol is a teenager. Even in the eyes of the law, he's still a minor, but he's not a child. It's not like he's 8 or 9 years old. So yeah, I mean, it wasn't and it kind of like rubbed me the wrong way that people are the wrong way so much about this relationship, because we see that going on every single day in our communities. No one bats an eye. No one says anything. But I think that many folks have a problem with it this time because it's an older woman.
I mean, I'm speaking for myself. Personally, I don't see it often in my community. And for me, it rubbed me the wrong way just because of his being underage. And we know so often, and I talked about this with Candace Bimbo on the earlier episode with we were talking about feminism, of how masculinity is constructed, right? So many boys are sexually abused and sexually harassed, and from women, but because people see masculinity as this great thing, people think it's okay for older women, like adults, to really prey on young boys, even if they're teenagers, right? They're still underage. And I see, many people have trauma over the years from this. I'm not saying, I mean, these are fictional characters in your book, obviously, but in a real life setting, I think there's so much unaddressed trauma that Black boys experience based on these underage relationships with older women, and they're thinking it's a badge of honor in many cases, which turns into toxic masculinity a lot of times as well, and I think has detrimental effects on our community. So that's the way I was reading it. But it's fictional.
Well, I mean, I actually agree with you, but I don't think that any of that really applies to this particular plot in the novel. It just doesn't. It's kind of like trying to fit. What do they say? Square peg in a round hole. It just doesn't fit this particular situation.
Gotcha. So, in the book, Raheem identifies as bisexual throughout the series. So clearly, we don't see that many SGL narratives in books, and I think bisexual people would say that they are even more invisible in the literature. So clearly, it was important to make him bisexual as opposed to just being gay. Would you say that was what you were going for in this series?
No. Well, I guess first of all, Raheem doesn't really identify as bisexual. It's kind of like a convenient marker
okay.
for other people to tag him as that, as we see with Roe when they have that conversation about Raheem and Mitchell being a couple. He's a man who has clearly had sex with both sexes and who finds both sexes attractive. So in the clinical sense, yeah, I guess you could say he's bisexual. But there are so many men like Raheem who just don't embrace those alphabet soup labels because they very much feel boxed in. And those labels themselves come with a whole lot of baggage that they don't want, that they don't embrace, that they don't identify with. So I think that on some level, Same Dinner Loving kind of fits the bill for him because he is indeed a man who loves other men, but specifically at this point in time in his life, this one man. And that describes not just, his relationship, but how he feels. So, and then there's really no baggage that comes along with that. He doesn't feel the pressure to have to wave a rainbow flag. So yes, I think that, and unfortunately, there's a whole lot of biphobia amongst specifically gay people that always seems to rear its head when someone announces that they are indeed bisexual, and of course the whole thing is like, the criticism is, why don't you just come out and just say you're gay? Well, no, there are indeed people on this earth who are attracted to both sexes.
Right.
That is the definition of bisexual. Get over it.
I agree.
Just because it's hard for you to digest, because maybe it, rubs you the wrong way for reasons that have everything to do with how you don't identify, don't project that onto other people.
No, absolutely. And like I said, I think visibility is really important. So the fact that you had this bisexual character, I think was a really important part of the series to also just share other stories. So Mitchell and Raheem, they had a lot of ups and downs in their relationship, and many of them were quite tough. So, a lot of us, when we we go to books to escape the negativity in the world. But this wasn't just, a pretty picture for them. So why was this narrative important for you to tell about these ups and downs with Mitchell and Raheem?
Well, actually, I just think it's a rather pretty picture that's painted of this particular family. Raheem moves back in. He literally becomes, the so-called wife, because he's doing all the things that many people still to this day think the wife should do. He's running the household. He's doing the shopping. He's cleaning. He's making dinner. He's tending to the children while, Mitchell is doing his career thing. So it's kind of like, and of course, Earl enjoying all of that because it's what he's always wanted, not just for them, but for him too. I guess the ups and downs of a relationship are just the natural occurrences that are woven into the story where, I guess for some people, it's kind of like, oh, not again. Right. More drama, not again. Well, I mean, life is dramatic. And then oftentimes I've been accused, writing stories with happy endings. And my response to that has always been, well, what's wrong? You don't like black people who are happy?
Right.
It's, we tend to, unfortunately, expect black folks to always be portrayed pathologically. On the page, on the stage, on the screen. And if we don't see that, something is wrong, at least in our eyes. And so, at the end of Men in the House, I really don't want to, I don't want to tell folks, because I really want folks to read it and experience it for themselves.
Right.
But I
No
do
spoilers.
believe that Mitchell and Raheem reunite, because given what happens immediately prior to that, and how that last scene happened, it's not so far-fetched. It was just a bump in the road. And they had already had so many other peaks and valleys that at this juncture, it's not something that we can so much overcome, but it's something that we can push through. So
I'm so glad you said that, because I was going to ask, did they get back together? So we have hope for Mitchell and Raheem reuniting in a future book.
Well, yeah, I believe they are still together today.
Okay. Right.
I mean, that truly is a love for all time. Given everything they've been through, individually and collectively, oh yeah.
Yeah. Personally, for me, I'm glad my relationship wasn't like theirs. That's what I meant by the ups and downs. I'm glad I didn't have that many ups and downs in my relationship. So what work still remains in making, Black SGL narratives more visible? This is a question from an anonymous submitter.
Well, we still have so many from A to Z that haven't been, I can't really say that haven't been told, because I know too many Black SGL writers who have written stories that very much illuminate another aspect of our lives, and they can't get a book deal.
Gotcha.
So it's not that they haven't been written, it's just that they really haven't seen the light of day. And, I mean, if you can think it and you can create it, do it, is what I say. Because you may not think so, but somebody needs to read that story. Somebody needs to experience that movie. Somebody needs to see that play played out in front of their eyes. The possibilities are endless. And I remember back in the day when I would meet folks on tour, and they would say, oh, well, I want to do what you do. I want to write something, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, well, what have you written? And they said, well, I haven't written anything. And I said, well, what are you waiting for? And both he and I will always tell folks, we can't write everything.
Right.
We can't be the voice for all of us.
Right.
I mean, it's both A, it's unfair to us, and B, it takes the power that you have away, because you have that power. Look at me.
Right.
I didn't think I could do it. I didn't even want to do it.
Right.
But I did, and I'm so glad that I did do it. So
we're glad that you did it as well.
Thank you.
So, You tackle a lot of contemporary topics in your novels like religion, gay marriage, same gender loving couples raising children. So clearly your books serve as a vehicle to, move our conversations forward. So what kinds of things do you worry about in this current political climate? And what do you see in the way of solutions for some of these problems that we're currently facing?
I believe it was Nina Simone who said it's an artist's duty to reflect the time. So it really is our responsibility to speak to the injustices that are happening today. And I don't think that people understand just how powerful artistic expression can be, how it can move and change the world. There are so many of us who, I think that a part of that is fear. You have to be fearless, not just in your craft, but in your purpose, which is why it's so important to have a community of artists surrounding you, so you know you're not doing this alone. We do have an army out here, and that's exactly what we need right now, because we are literally battling the forces of evil right now. And I mean, I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but I'm doing everything in my power to fight that. So I hope that more of us take up the mantle. The baton definitely has been passed.
Right.
So the question is, are you going to run with it? So I hope more of us run with it.
I hope so too. So just to close us out, what future projects do you have in the works, and what are some things we could be on the lookout for from you?
Well, the audio versions of the titles in the series will finally start to make their way out later this year. The movie version is still in development, and by extension, the series, because at this point, given that there are 8 books or 8 installments, we just need a series.
Yes.
So we can actually, travel back and forth in time with them and experience that all over again. And I am working on a couple of other things, not B-Boy Blues related, and that should come sometime in 21. So.
Excellent. Well, we look forward to all of your work. Definitely this series. I'm not sure if you had the opportunity to catch the Noah's Ark Corona Chronicles series, but it just seeing that, it was like how badly we really need to see us on TV again. I'm definitely looking forward to your series coming out.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, James, for the gift of your literary work and for telling nuanced and complex stories that centered Black same-gender loving men. I wish you continued success and look forward to supporting your future projects. So much love to you, brother. Thank you for listening to Diversity Matters. If you enjoyed our show and want to hear more, please subscribe to our show, post, talk about, and reshare our show with all of your friends and family. And leave us a favorable rating and review so that it will make it easier for others to find us wherever they listen to podcasts. We cannot do this important work or keep it going without you, so we really appreciate your support. We especially like to thank our episode sponsor, Rutgers School of Business Camden alum Mackenzie Alston, founder and CEO of ULLC. ULLC empowers personal, career, and business growth through knowledge, helping organizations and individuals become their best selves, as well as offer real estate consulting and coaching services. For more information, please visit their website at www.ullcww.com. If you or your company would like to sponsor a Diversity Matters episode, please visit the podcast section of our website at www.whconsultingfirm.com for more information. Diversity Matters is produced by WH Consulting, a firm that provides a wide range of management consulting and professional services to individuals and organizations. Original music produced by Sincere Morton Murray. Until next time, peace and love.